Welcome to Life Happens, where Texans come to protect their legacy and prepare for the second half of life. Join your host, attorney Kim Hegwood with Hegwood Law Group, and our weekly guest as we navigate the challenges that emerge as life happens. Now here's your host, Kim Hegwood.
Good morning and welcome to Life Happens with me, Kim Hegwood, and our very special guest today is Christy Yates. And good morning.
Hi, how are you? I'm happy to be here.
Well, that's good. And so Christy is an author and a speaker, and I'm assuming by what we're going to talk about today, you have a lot of personal experience to talk about. And so,
I do, yes.
And so we're going to be talking about the framework for the sandwich generation. And so my sandwich generation kind of skipped a generation. So it was grandparents and taking care of teenagers. And, I feel your pain. So we're going to talk about that and hopefully have some good tips for other parents that, for other children that have been in your shoes so it's always important. And so from your perspective, what is your definition of the sandwich generation?
Yeah, so the sandwich generation is actually a term that was coined back in like the 1980s by a social worker who was seeing people in her practice that were raising kids and now all of a sudden caring for an aging parent, and they were really stressed out. And so she saw them as being squeezed between, two sides. So I didn't coin that term. That's just out there. And in 2014, Pew Research Center estimated about 47% of Americans were in this space. As of 2021, that's up to about 54%. And it's really defined as people who are raising children in their home. So they have at least one child in their home that's under the age of 18. Plus, they have an aging parent over the age of 65 that they're managing the care for. And by many estimates, people who are in this sandwich generation are also providing financial help to an aging parent. And the average cost of that could be up to $1,000 a month because care for aging is really expensive. And so that's part of the sandwich generation. But you're still managing and raising kids in the same time.
Yeah. And so mine were teenagers, so they were at least somewhat self-sufficient.
Right.
When my grandparents started to decline, but it didn't make it any easier.
No, and mine were middle school, high school, and really we're seeing women are having children later in life. So really right now about the ages between 40 and 50, that's when most of parents are experiencing this sandwich generation. So they may have kids that are middle school, high school, and even young adults. There are also people that are having to care for an adult child in their home, right? So someone who might be a dependent, or through COVID, we saw a lot of multifamily generations coming together to live because of financial constraints and health issues. And so there's a whole lot of trends that are shifting and shaking, but it really falls oftentimes to that person in the middle. So I went through this time in 2015, caring for my parents. Both of them had some form of dementia. My mother had Alzheimer's. My dad had vascular dementia. My kids were as I said, middle school, high school, and I was working full-time as a school psychologist. So I also saw this in schools where parents would be concerned about their kids, or teachers were concerned about kids with behavior issues or falling behind academically. And one of my first questions to a parent would be, has anything changed in the home? And I can't tell you how many times, I wish I'd taken data on this, but I can't tell you how many times the response was, well, my dad has stage 4 colon cancer and just moved in with us. Or I'm taking care of my grandmother who has Alzheimer's. Or my mother just died and she was the primary caregiver while I was working with my kids. So there's all of these factors impact children too. And what I found was, and why I wrote my book, Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation, is I was finding lots of stuff that told me what to do for my parents, which I needed. So that's really important information. But I couldn't find anything that talked to me about what's the impact on my kids and parenting. And so after my mother died, 7 weeks after my dad died, I went back to work, and people were coming out of the woodwork telling me, "Oh, I'm in your shoes now. What do I do?" And I realized there's information people might need, a little heads up. And so that's why I wrote the book, and that's why I'm trying to get the message out there and have people talk about it.
So how do you balance the care for your kids and a parent that's has been diagnosed with those kinds of diagnoses?
Um, One of the most important things is really to build your team. And this is something that I think I really found that I learned a lot of lessons during this time period. Let me tell you, it was hard, and I had great privilege. My parents were. I did not have to support them financially, so that was great. It was still really time consuming, but it's building your team. It's having neighbors know what you're going through, so that if there were a situation where someone needed to, you know, carpool to soccer practice or to play practice or something, you have people you can call on, because you never know when those emergencies are going to show up. So that those are some of the things. The other one is to find resources in your community that can support you. In most urban and suburban areas, you can find senior services that are supportive and can give you some respite care at times, but also some advice through case management. They can offer some senior support services, adult daycare, but also assessment to help you know what you need to do with your parents. And that's really important, because you as the caregiver might not really be the best person to make all those assessments about what's needed next, because you're not a neutral party, and you see your parents one way, and a professional might be able to assess a little bit differently. So I think it's finding all of those resources. And I'd say start with senior support services in your area and ask them, what can I do? And they will be there to kind of navigate with you.
So how do you talk to kids about these issues? Because this is, with children, they don't really understand death, because it's not a concept that, or even, I think
Right.
decline, because it's not a concept that they're familiar with. And so
Yeah.
how do you help that child understand?
So I really think these are great conversations that we can have, and I I agree with you. Like, younger children under the age of 5, they really don't have an idea about death or dementia. As they get a little bit older, kids are surprisingly resilient and really compassionate. Most kids want to help. Think about your younger children that are saying, "I want to help. Let me help," and they want to understand. And so it's just being very concrete. So, really, your 5 to 10-year-olds, you can just be very concrete. And if you're talking about, grandma's getting older, and talk about the circle of life, right? I mean, you can just do all that Lion King stuff, right? But and you can relate it back to things they know and understand. Look at how plants grow, and then flowers bloom, and then they die, and then they come back. And if you have the loss of a pet, there might be something there you can talk to about, again, life and death, and how it's normal and it's natural. And then when you're dealing with something like dementia, it's really helping kids to understand grandma is acting differently because there's something going on in her brain that makes it hard for her to understand. There are some great resources out there. I happen to be one of the authors in a group called Al's Authors, and there's a website, alsauthors.com, and they have wonderful books for children. And that's a great way for teens and children. And you can open that conversation about, this is what's going on. So when grandma says the same thing over and over, or she doesn't recognize you, it doesn't mean she doesn't love you. We just have to recognize that this is what's going on for her right now, and to help them sort of see what might be happening. The other thing that's really important is to make sure your kids are honest, or helping them feel open to telling you, "I feel scared. This feels frightening to me."
So what tips would you give caregivers who are in the sandwich generation?
I definitely think that you need to reach out to others who are going through this. So finding support groups who can help you. There are online support groups. I offer an online support group. There are, if you have your parent has dementia or Alzheimer's, there are plenty of support groups that you can get into, and many of them are online now. And that's a great way to learn from others.
So I believe in your book, maybe you talk about using things like meditation, mindfulness. I know after coming out of COVID, I did a lot of mindset work. And so I can't tell you how uplifting it is to never watch the news. So,
Exactly.
yeah, stop watching the news makes a world of difference. But, what kinds of things can families and the children do along this area to kind of help them, or help the caregiver, get through the process?
Yeah, I really believe in all of those kinds of things. And it kind of goes in the bucket of self care, which has become sort of a catchphrase for a lot of things. But caregivers, and parents, we sometimes think, oh, it's selfish if we take care of ourselves. But the thing is our kids are always learning, and they're learning from watching what we do, not so much about what we're saying. So it's important to um, be aware of what they're learning. And they might be learning that it's okay to take care of yourself. They might be learning that this is a healthy way to live my life, is to set boundaries. And you can actually have that conversation. So I recommend even having a wellness talk with your family. Like, this is how we set boundaries with others, right? If we don't want to do things because we feel uncomfortable, we need to share our feelings and talk about it. But here are some really cool things we could do together. It might be some yoga. It might be let's take a mindful meditation minute at just before we go to bed, or different kinds of things we can do. And when your kids see you doing this and you're doing that with them, you're teaching them wellness practices that can help them in their lifetime. And I definitely think doing some close down of social media at a certain point is really important, right? So having central docking stations where that's where the iPads and the iPhones go, so that
Yeah.
your kids aren't consuming that on a 24/7 basis, and helping them understand why that's important. Like, what is mindset, and why do we want to like you said, not watching the news on a constant basis. It's important. What we put in our body feeds our body, and what we put in our brain feeds our brain. So it's important to kind of look at all that. But my my biggest piece of advice is that kids are always learning, and we need to be aware of what we're teaching, because they're watching what we do, not always, oh, this is what mom said.
Yeah, my kids were really great. So good through the process. So it was very good. It was very good for them. Um,
Mhm.
Definitely created an opportunity for us to have the discussion.
Yeah.
Over, I know y'all are young and you don't think I'm ever going to get old, but
Yeah.
this is how I want you to take care of me.
Yes. Well, we're
And
training them, aren't we? Yeah.
because I didn't, I did not want my kids having to personally take care of me. Did not want that. And so I'm like, just figure out where you're going to put me. All three of you can split the bill. No big deal. So, but, because I wanted to make sure that that wasn't going to be an issue for them down the road. Now they're probably going to do something different because I know them, but, at least keep talking about it and say, no, don't do that. This is what I want you to do for me. It's important for me for you to do these things. And so I think having the conversation, too, about all of it. I took the grandkids went to funerals when they were little, and while they didn't really kind of understand the concept, one of them had walked up to the casket and said, they just look like they're sleeping.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was all his little, brain. I'm like, yes, that's exactly what they look like. And so,
Right.
but,
Right.
and I think sometimes that it's that you just have to have as much age appropriate conversations that you can have, with children, and I do think they learn by example. So
Exactly.
most
And
definitely.
You bring up a good point, and I do talk a lot about grief in the book. And one of the things that's really important is being really clear with kids about what's going on, because yeah, they might look like they're sleeping, but helping them to understand. And again, under 5, maybe that's not where you want to spend all your time. And you want to find ways to support yourself during memorials and funerals, because you're going to be going through a grief process, and your kids feel that energy from you, and it might be scary for them. So that's another place where you're going to bring your village in to help you. Is there somebody who can be there to help your kids and sit there with your kids if you're feeling upset and overcome? And Kim, one of the things you said about talking with your family about what you want, that's a big message in my book. My parents had all of this laid out. They knew what they wanted. They had a trust. They had a financial plan. They had written instructions about where they wanted to be. They wanted to be cremated. My dad was a veteran. He wanted to go to a national cemetery. It was all laid out. That meant when they were at their critical time period, I didn't have to think about what do they need? What do they want? What do I have to do? It was all laid out. And to me, that's the legacy of love, right? It wasn't necessarily money that I got from them. It was this message, this lesson. And so that spurred my husband and I to put all of our affairs in order when we were young, because you never know. Yeah. And it's such a gift to give that to your kids, that you've thought about those difficult things, because when you're grieving, that's not the time to make decisions about all of these things. It's so much harder.
No, we tell everybody, if you have someone you love, you plan.
Yeah.
Because it's just too important not to,
Yeah.
So, and then your plan, just so Christy, needs to be updated, because life changes.
Yes.
Change, they grow up, and you see what they do. So you can
right.
make adjustments and really help protect them, throughout their lifetime. So. All right. So how does somebody find you in your book?
So I'm pretty easy to find. I'm on Amazon as Christy Yates. Might be there as Christy Byrne Yates, but my book is on Amazon. It's available as an ebook, as a paperback, and as an Audible, because many sandwich generation folks need it to be something they can listen to in the car, because you don't have time to sit and read a book. And you can also find me at my website is ChristyYates.com. So that's the tricky part there is there's about 500 ways to spell Christy. It's ChristyYates.com. So ChristyYates.com. And you can find me there, and you can buy my book through my website also.
And they can email you as well, right?
Absolutely.
And so what's that for our listeners? What's that email address?
So it would be Christy@cbyates.com. And there's also a contact form on the website. And I offer some caregiver support groups, caregiver coffee breaks. So for people who are struggling, I can offer some support like that. And I also do one-on-one consultations. And I also speak to a lot of assisted living communities and other senior service centers, and doing educational workshops around different areas around the whole sandwich generation and parenting in this time period, and especially focusing on how to work with kids during this time.
Perfect. All right. Thanks so much for being on the show. It's been hugely educational, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you so much, Kim.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Life Happens with Kim Hegwood. Be sure to tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. wherever you listen to your podcast, as we navigate through the challenges that emerge as life happens. The content of this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship or constitute attorney-client privilege, legal, medical, financial, or any other professional advice.